Welcome, everybody. Here we are, Talk of the Town, in October, and we're delighted to welcome as our guest the great, renowned Neil Baldwin, who has tackled modernism in all of its forms. And tonight we're going to talk about his great book, A Biography of Martha Graham, which Knopf published, and I was the guilty party as the editor. So I'm just going to introduce for a few seconds, and then we'll turn it over to all of us, and we will talk away. So Agnes DeMille said of Martha Graham, technically speaking, Graham's is the single largest contribution in the history of Western dancing. Martha Graham believed that movement could express inner feeling. Out of emotion comes form, said Graham, and out of form, Graham was able to recreate emotion on stage. She gave, quote, visible substance to things felt, and to, quote, chart the graph of the heart, ideas that were central to her art. Time magazine called her the dancer of the century. The Martha Graham technique used by dance companies throughout the world became the first long-lasting alternative to the movements of classical ballet. Graham's pioneering movements, powerful, dynamic, jagged, edgy, forthright, and her system of training were the essence of American modernism and of performance as art. Graham was a true revolutionary in the arts of the 20th century and the American dancer and choreographer in developing a form of expression that broke the traditional mold. Her genius was universally recognized as she became the most honored figure in American dance, as well as in her choreographic masterworks. She produced 181 works during a period of 60 years. She was the recipient of the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the first dancer and choreographer to receive that honor, and also among the first to receive the National Medal of Arts. America has stood with me, said Graham, and I like to feel that those of us who are dancers have contributed toward a singing voice that will go on for a long time. Neil Baldwin, the person to my far right, is a first-rate biographer and cultural historian. He's written biographies of William Carlos Williams, of Man Ray, which has been called remarkable, truly definitive, absolutely fascinating, on Henry Ford, on Thomas Edison, which Bob Caro has called a major contribution to our understanding of a remarkable man and a remarkable era. Baldwin's biography of Martha Graham has been hailed as majestic by John Guare and mesmerizing by Publishers Weekly. It's the first biography of Martha Graham in 3 decades. In it, Neil Baldwin has given us the artist and performer and the dance monument who led a cult of dance worshipers, as well as the woman herself in all her complexities. The dance world was forever altered by Martha Graham's vision, which has been and continues to be a source of inspiration for generations of dance and theater artists. Let's welcome Neil Baldwin.
Thank you.
Okay, so Neil, once you turn your microphone on.
Yes.
Okay, so you set out to tell a story of how Martha Graham became Martha Graham.
Yes, we did, Vicki.
And here's my first question, which is why another biography after the book on Graham by Agnes DeMille? Was there something that DeMille left out that needed to be said?
I think it was actually more than what Agnes DeMille left out. It was what I wanted to put in. You know, as you've heard, I've spent my whole life writing about the modern movement in art, literature, technology, performance, etc. And I felt like Martha Graham needed to be situated in that context. So therefore, she needed to have a sort of a cast of characters around her that also exemplified modernism in their own efforts, in their own artwork. That's number one. Number two, once I read the DeMille book, and I felt like there was a lot of I knew there was an animus, there was a rivalry and an animus between the two of them, and that later on in Agnes's life, when she was trying to finish the book, Martha Graham called up all her friends and told them not to talk to her, and there was a lot of bitterness because she never let Agnes into the company, et cetera, et cetera. So there was a kind of veneer of let's say, animosity, sort of verging on gossip. Not that I'm against gossip, no, but I felt like Martha Graham needed a through line that was more objective, not too objective, but more objective. And I felt like I was in a position to do that because not being a dancer, but having an affinity for the modern art movement, I could accomplish this goal. So that's what my motivation was.
And
Go ahead.
yeah, in reading, am I on? Yeah, okay. In reading your book, Neil, there was one sentence that stood out to me. I hope I'm quoting it right.
I hope so.
Because it is the challenge of a biographer of a subject as difficult as Martha Graham. You said she wanted to be seen, but she did not want to be seen into.
Oh, that is very, I can't believe I actually wrote that. No, that's very, very true. That is probably the most, that's probably sort of like when I realized the barriers that were between me and my subject. Unlike other subjects, I'll just give two quick examples. So William Carlos Williams was a poet, as you know. He had a huge archive of manuscripts, which I was privileged to catalog when I was in grad school, and at Yale and Buffalo. So I was really into his productivity on a huge scale. And then Man Ray, a photographer and a painter, but he had left, of course, lots of examples of his work in different repositories and museums all over the world, which I was able to look at, so I could sort of get my arms around everything. But it soon became evident to me that Martha Graham, she was almost like trying to cover all her tracks except the actual dance itself. So, I mean, like literally burning all her letters, destroying most of her notebooks, locking the door, literally tying a red ribbon around the door handles of her studio so that no one could get in while she was in the process of devising a dance, because she started out by doing it on her own body, and then she would let her dancers come in. Being very circumspect about the motivation and the impetus and the influence of her work. And you know, as I mentioned earlier, she gave one taped interview to Don McDonough, who was the New York Times dance critic back in the 70s. And that's like less than an hour. It's in the New York Public Library, Performing Arts Division. And that really did it for me, because the circumspect way that she talked, I mean, it was impossible to decipher what she was actually telling him. And the fact that he only got to see her for under an hour, and most of the time, all you hear was the ice in the glasses clinking while they're drinking, and she gets up and leaves the room for like 20 minutes to go find a book. The idea is that the mystique, I felt like, I was saying to Vicky earlier, the sort of crucial way that I was able to penetrate the mystique was when the Martha Graham company which is celebrating its 100th birthday next spring, April 2026, which is quite an incredible accomplishment. They let me into their rehearsals. They let me interview their dancers and all of sort of like the retired, second, third generation. And so I was able to find an embodiment quality through the living, breathing dancers of today, that I was able to infuse that into the book.
But you didn't have access to her.
No.
And even had she been alive, you wouldn't have had access to her.
I'm sure she would have. This is what she did. So Clive Barnes, you remember Clive Barnes, right? So he was the dance critic at the Times. Also, he tried to get I think he got a contract to write the biography, but she wouldn't speak to him. She just wouldn't speak to him, and she called up all of her acquaintances in the dance world and basically legislated them to silence.
Because what she was interested in, well, I mean, she destroyed her letters to her mother, did she not?
Yes, she did.
Her letters to her lovers,
Correct.
old programs,
Right.
and reviews, all destroyed. And so at a certain point you say, I mean, what she wanted was the dance, obviously, to speak for itself.
Right. That's right, Vicki. The thing is that just to underscore that point, the problem with, this is perhaps opening another trail, but the problem of dance legacy is that it is it's a challenge that it's transmitted from one body to another. I mean, the people who are choreographing and setting Graham's works on the company now are people who had them set on them by Martha. So we're reaching the sort of final phase of that degree of separation. So that makes it difficult for someone in my position to follow a trail when you know that your subject is not on your side.
Well, their subject is thwarting you at every step along the way.
What was she hiding?
Well, I don't think it's hiding. I think it's very good that we're trying to peel back the layers on this because, well, the way that I was able to, one of the best incursions I made was when Vicki encouraged me to go more deeply into Martha Graham, the one person who Martha Graham was married to, Eric Hawkins, for 7 years, and he was also her dance partner. So even there, I was able to have access to all of his journals and the pages and pages that he wrote to her, like when she would be in California visiting her mother and he would be at home in New York City having to maintain the apartment and clean up the studio and sort of pining away for her. He kept copies of all of his letters to her, and they're in the Library of Congress. So I was able to gain an entry into her, as you say, hidden life through the emotional complexity of her relationship with someone who, if you want to just imagine that your dancing and bedroom partner is choreographing your actions in front of an audience. Like when because he was was the first man to come into her all-female company, and so she led him through that portal, which of course caused a great debate among the women. But she was the choreographer, and even when you look at the early duets, if you can call them that, you can see the ambivalence that she's choreographing onto the two of them to kind of like express the difficulties of their relationship.
Well, didn't her choreography change? The sort
yes.
of tenor of her work change when she was with him?
Yes.
To sort of reveal that.
Yeah, that was the revelatory phase in her work. First was Eric Hawkins came in, then Merce Cunningham was the second dancer who came into the company, male dancer. And she started to get involved in mythical, Greek mythology, and then she got into, she was very fixated upon the Brontes, the three sisters who were all authors. She was very interested in Shakespeare. She started to become more, it's true, she started to become more research-oriented. And that was a big revelation. I was able to go back and look at the books that she took out of the library because she wrote down in her notebook the call letters for the books that she was using to study.
That's a perfect detail of a biographer who looks up the call letters to get the book.
But when you're talking about Martha Graham through Eric Hawkins, and those sections are fascinating, it is Eric Hawkins who's front and center. And we're seeing her through him. We're not exactly seeing her directly. We're seeing her filtered through a very complex and competitive relationship. That marriage was doomed from the first minute.
True.
There was no way it could have lasted.
I think that there's conflict in her dance. In her choreography, there is conflict from the beginning, embodied conflict from the 20s all the way up to the 40s when she met him. There's embodied conflict, but it's all female. It was an all-female company until 1938.
But she's telling different stories when
Right.
she's with him. But the thing is, since we're all here, we're all biographers here, apart from everything else that we do. A couple of things. You say that, first of all, you found her writings, her stories that she wrote in high school.
Oh, yes. Thank you for reminding me of that.
And were those useful? Were those revealing?
That was a very important discovery that Agnes DeMille and others had never thought about looking into. Because when she moved to Santa Barbara, and when she was about 14 with her family, they moved from Pittsburgh because her sister had asthma, and she needed in Pittsburgh was heavily polluted, as you know. And so they all moved out there when Martha was about 15. And I thought it was very interesting because she was 4'11", but she was elected captain of the girls' basketball team. No, there's a lot in there because I thought, or maybe...
Well, I was going to ask you, what did that provide for you? That
provided for me a key to how early she was viewed as a leader among her peers. And she was a new girl. She had just gotten there, for the first semester of the sophomore year. That was the first thing I thought about, was that was an elected position and she was a demon on the basketball court. The second thing was she joined the literary magazine because one of her English teachers felt that she put her arm around her and said, Martha, I think you're destined to be a writer. You have a very nice way with the words, et cetera, et cetera. So she wrote a couple of really sort of like almost memoirish short stories where there was always a protagonist of a girl who felt separate from the other students, who would sit by herself in the lunchroom, and then she would go home and go up to her bedroom and read a book by herself by the window, and various young men wanted to take her out, but she was very picky, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Though there was all through the fictional characters that she created, which were based upon her, and so those early kinds of signals, which were before she became, a figure, were very helpful to me.
Now, the other thing was her father, who was a doctor who specialized in, I guess, psychic well-being, had a big influence on her, which I'd like you to talk about. But his line to her, which you talk about, his line to her was, "Movement never lies."
Right, movement never lies. So her father, Dr. Graham, he was an alienist, which in the 1890s was the early kind of term for what we call a psychiatrist now. And when they were in Pittsburgh, he worked at an asylum, as they were called, north of Allentown, where they lived. And one night, he brought home one of his patients to welcome her, to make her feel more at home. And she had dinner with the family. And while she was at the table, Martha noticed that this young woman had kind of eccentric ways of lifting her fork and chewing and kind of looking around. And there was something kind of odd about this young woman. So after she left, that's when the movement Never Lies came in, because she sat down with her father and she was asking him, why she was under his care, because of what he did as a doctor. And he said, well, you can see from her persona, you can see from her body language. That's how I study the young people and figure out and get a sense of what might be wrong with them. Movement never lies. And it's interesting because that phrase, I did an analysis. Okay, don't, you can think that I'm obsessive, you're right. So I took that phrase, it went through her entire career. She told the story in about 3 or 4 different ways as she got older, and it became more emblematic and more symbolic, and she carried it through to the 40s and the 50s. And that's another sort of way, as we were talking about, it's another way of like getting inside by looking at the writing patterns and the things that she said to her dancers that they would recall in their reminiscences and things like that. You have to, it's like, just to give one more quick example, there was, I was trying to put her in the room with somebody, because she did go to some parties, although she was not a big party goer. She said it was a waste of time. But I remember there was one composer whose papers I was looking at, and in his papers, I'm sorry I can't remember his name now, but he wrote down in his journal who was at this reception, and Martha Graham was on the list, so I was able to backtrack to who gave the party and who else was in that circle of people, and sort of there were artists and musicians and performers and things like that. So there were lots of emblematic things like that added up to 576 pages.
But Neil, in reading the book, I wasn't clear what she felt about her parents. Her mother is mentioned frequently. She goes back to Santa Barbara to see her, but her mother is not characterized by you. And how did she relate to her mother, and how did she feel about her father? What were the emotional feelings? I didn't get the family drama exactly.
That's because I think I decided to let that be, again, a statement about her relationship with the two of them in terms of what I was able to glean from her disproportionately between the mother and the father. It's true. Her father was, I think I did talk a bit more. I think I talked about her father's influence in terms of the fact that he took her to her first dance concert.
I thought she adored the father.
Yeah, she did.
I got that sense.
You got that feeling?
Yes.
But what about the mother?
Well, the mother...
She went to visit her dutifully.
Yes, she went to visit her dutifully, and they had a long correspondence. And I guess at a certain point I realized it's like when you're digging. This is a very unpoetic metaphor. So you know, we have a garden in our house, out in New Jersey, and I'm the person that digs all the holes. And my wife does all the planting. Then my job is to dig all the holes. Okay, so some of the holes are really easy to dig, and it's effortless. And others, for no apparent reason, it could be 2 feet away. You can't even, get the shovel into the earth to just get any leverage at all. And that's kind of how it felt about my seeking to find a reality with her mother and her father. But I will say that she was his favorite. There was 3 girls and 3 sisters. That's why I think I talked about this, that why Martha Graham felt this affinity with the Bronte sisters, because there were 3 of them, and plus there was a brother. Brontes had a brother, a sort of a ne'er-do-well brother, and Martha Graham, which I put a picture of him in my book. They finally had a little boy, 3 girls, and they finally had a little boy, William, and he died of scarlet fever or something when he was about 18 months old. But there's this picture of the 3 girls, sort of nurturing this little child, and these are the kinds of humanity, sort of slivers of humanity that add up, that you can add them up. The accretion of this is what makes one able to give more personal affinity with the person that you're writing about.
When you do come up with a dramatic incident, and there are dramatic incidents, she had a terrible temper during rehearsals, and you have her slapping Noguchi.
Wow, you're right.
And having a terrible argument with Ted Shawn.
Pulling the tablecloth.
And screaming at a critic, walking across a restaurant and screaming at him. You are so much more tactful than I would have been as a biographer. Martha Graham is lucky I wasn't the biographer.
Well, you don't want to judge her, even if she does slap Noguchi. But look, let me just ask you this.
But Neil is very tactful. You come across these nuggets, but you don't give them pride of place. They're almost parenthetical. Did you make that decision to present her not in that negative way?
I also, Vicki and I worked on this book for 13 years, I believe, from start to finish. And during that course of time, there were many discussions about I was cautioned not to idealize or idolize her, especially toward the end, when I was trying to make this crescendo and this big sort of dictum, about the icon. And Vicki warned, it sort of nudged me away from that. And I feel like the biggest struggle for me, now that you're bringing these things up, was that I started to have this very deep, heartfelt admiration for this woman, and it really grew when I started to participate in the activities of the company and sit in on rehearsals and go on tour with them and help help them sort of as a dramaturg in terms of the origins of some of the dances and that the dancers themselves didn't know about, and writing program notes and so forth and so on. And I realized that luckily I got out of the book, escaped from the book before I'm lucky that I was cautioned to control my inner emotions to the degree that you have to think, and Vicki also, we talked about this, you have to remember that this is for other people to read. It's like I remember when I added up the footnotes one day, I guess, had a spare moment when I was getting produced. There was 2,000 footnotes in the book. And then I thought about how that really should not affect the reader response. It shouldn't be like, oh my God, there's 2,000 footnotes, you work so hard, and this and that and the other. That's not really it's truly not, I don't want that for the book. I want the story in the book.
But Neil, listening to you, she was right, because what you're saying is she made it very difficult for a biographer until you saw her dances, until you saw the work. And then once you saw the work, you connected to her.
Yes, that's very
The
true.
work revealed the woman.
And also...
Well, it let him in.
Yeah, the fact is, letting in, the Martha Graham Company they run a very, very, very tight ship. It's always been this like Martha, I think Vicky mentioned the word cult, but Martha this and Martha that, and Martha said to me one time, the woman who was running it, Janet Elber, she's been with the company in one way or another for 50 years. Martha Graham singled her out when she was a freshman at Juilliard. Because that's what she used to do. Come up here, show the other people. And that moment, so now she's the head of the whole artistic director, and so she invokes Martha a lot. And the other dancers stand around, very diligently when they're having rehearsal, and they're giving notes at the end, and there's a lot of sense of spiritual embodiment. And I still, this is the thing, it's 3 years to the day since this book was published, October 22nd.
Happy anniversary.
But the thing is that I'm probably more involved than I was before I'm probably more involved with Martha Graham now than I was when I was writing the book. I'm just part of I don't mean to sound cliched, but they let you in, and once they let you in and you pass the time and you show that you're time tested and you're faithful and you're diligent and you're serious, then, it's kind of like you're one of the people that's in among the 17 people. That's all there are in the company, so.
All right, let me ask you this, because let's talk about how she came to be a dancer late. She began to train at Denishon in her 20s. And talk about the influence of Ruth St. Denis and Ted Shawn, and how Shawn created dances for her that showcased her theatricality.
See, that was very interesting in terms of what we were saying about father and mother. So the Dennis Shawn Company, that's a composite of Ruth St. Denis and Ted Shawn, who were the ostensible couple, although that was kind of ambiguous, who ran this workshop school in LA. And so Martha Graham, she got older, and she went to a high school, and then she went to like a finishing school for the arts called the Cumnock School. I have a picture of her if we get to the...
We're going to do
yeah.
the picture.
Okay, no, I have a picture of her when she was a student there. She did like a spring dance festival or something like that. Okay, so the long story short is that she auditioned for, when you did an audition for Dennis Shawn, you did it for both in the same room, right? Like they both sat there. And so Ruth St. Denis would say things like, all right, move across the room for me. Something very simple like that to see how you would interpret it. And she was like the lead instigator in terms of what the young ladies were expected to do. And Ted Shawn sat back and appreciated the thing that Ruth St. Denis did not, which was Martha Graham showed an idiosyncratic form of movement that Ted Shawn found very like original. He hadn't, quote, never seen anybody move like that. Whereas Ruth St. Dennis's comment at the end of the audition was, and I don't mean to be, I mean, she basically criticized Martha Graham for being too short. She wasn't blonde. I'm just telling you, like, you know, she wasn't your typical artiste, danseuse, you know, with the willowy limbs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But he took her aside and said he was going to, quote, give her a chance because he saw something in there. Like he really kindled the flame of, in terms of, we talked about being seen. I mean, when you go to a dance rehearsal, a lot of times when the person who's setting the dance on the dancers has a big crowd, and there's people in the back and people in the front, and at one point they will flip the you know, where the people are standing so that they can be seen. It's very important quality to have that distinguishes you in some way or another. And I think that was a very pervasive influence in a very impressionable time.
Before we look at the slides, which we'll do in a second, how did she come to talk about how she came to want her own school?
Yeah, she came to New York, actually 66th Fifth Avenue, which is right up the road here.
And she lived at 29
that's,
West 12th,
wow.
right around the corner.
You're so right, yeah. This is really Martha Graham land. Like,
We're in the middle of Martha Graham
vibe,
land,
you can
and I'm
feel-
at 49, so
Oh
she
my
was my
God.
neighbor.
Well, this is the vibe. Okay, so what was I talking about? Oh, how she started her own school.
Yeah.
So the other thing that attracted me to Martha Graham after I'd been working on this for a while was, which we haven't even talked about, so I'm glad Vicki brought it up, the pedagogical thread, the pedagogical theme in Martha Graham. She was as much of an originator of technique, of her own technique, as she was committed to young people and developing and encouraging young people to, as others have said to me over the years, that she wanted to evoke the selfhood of the young dancers in her company. She influenced them by stimulating them to exteriorize their inner selves. Like, so you're in an ensemble, and obviously you have to follow a certain methodology, but you also are an individual. And I think that by that time, 26, she had developed her own technique, which I will just read you a very quick description because I thought it would come up. But I wrote a program note for the English National Ballet. Recently, they did the first Martha Graham piece they've ever done over there. So they wanted me to explain her technique. I had 1,000 words.
That was my next question, by the way. What
Okay.
actually is the Martha Graham?
Okay, so here we go. Oh yeah, I said quote from myself. That's to remind me of that. English National Ballet, they did Errand into the Maze, which is a kind of an interpretation of the Theseus and the Minotaur myth. So, this is a quote from Martha Hill, who was one of Martha Graham's premier dancers during the 30s. So this is Martha Hill talking. Martha Graham's work builds on a pulse through the body, wrote one of her company stars, Martha Hill. Quote, attention and release, which is her dramatization of the breath impulse. This modern mode, this is me talking now. This modern mode displays a movement vocabulary nurtured within the body's visceral core, exemplified by groundedness, angular counterforces, quickening transitions, and primal leaps in extremis. I want to be able to look through your emotions into you, she told her students, as one can look into a child's eyes. So contraction and release is the sort of, if one had to summarize the technique, which is very hard to, you see how I can't demonstrate it for you, but no. I'm just saying, like, I once tried in the studio and they all laughed at me, but, oh, Neil. But anyway, so there's a kind of, it's like the whole body is breathing at the same. It's like you're controlling your entire embodiment into an intake and an out give. It's very yogic and kind of Eastern, but it draws upon your core, which is like right here, right in the lower abdomen here. So she created this school once she had perfected this technique, and that was her way of, getting outside the ballet box, as it were. That that was what the school was for, and that's what it's still for today.
Okay, let's look at some of the slides. I'll push them, I'll control them, and you talk about them.
Okay. Let me get my little. Oh, I don't need this. Okay, so this is we just put together a very there's 110 photographs in this book, thanks to Vicky's tolerance of my not being able to decide which ones to leave out. So she just said, well, let's just put all of them in there. So
we did take a few out.
Well, very few, like three or four.
They were good images, and when you look at the book, you're going to see how great they are. But
So-
here's a small sample.
So this is Martha, as I said, this is 1915. So let me think, 1894. So she was 21. Then this was sort of like her coming out, that she got her picture in the paper, as it were. Okay, next slide. So I wanted to show, as we talked about, her initial, I think I'm going to stand up for a minute.
Stand up.
Her initial influence in the Denishon was very much a kind of to use the phrase that is no longer used, Oriental exoticism. So this is when she started to take on other persona. And I want to just say that this is one of the earlier costumes, but for most of her career, she designed all the costumes for all of her dancers and all of her dances. She designed them herself. And here's where it starts to get, as I was talking about, like, it starts to get more radical, you can see the angularity. This is a piece called Strike, which was about 1920, 21. And you see, this is like how can you describe this? This almost looks like pleather. Or, they didn't have it back then, but it's a kind of like a vinyl treated
Neil,
sheath.
isn't it sort of Kandinsky-like?
Yes, Kandinsky-like. Kandinsky was a big favorite of hers. As a matter of fact, Kandinsky was one of the artists that she saw a painting of his in the Chicago Art Institute, and supposedly she said, I want to make a dance like that.
Yeah, it has that quality.
Yeah. Okay. Now I'm saying it's famous for those who know her work. I'm not trying to intimidate anybody. This is called Lamentation. Now this is a 1931 or 2. You don't see the bench, but she's sitting on a sort of low bench, and this is a sheath, a cotton sheath. It's one piece. It has a hood and goes all the way down your entire body. And she wrote this. She did this piece. She said she was trying to embody bereavement. She was starting to demonstrate specific emotions in specific ways. Now I want to show you the ensemble. This is called Primitive Mysteries. This is a good example because this was when she had her, I think there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, there's 12, the 12 girls, that's what she called them, 12 girls, and she's the virgin in the middle, of course. The interesting thing about this piece is that when I was writing the book, the reason she created this piece was because she went out to New Mexico to visit the Pueblo, Native American Pueblo reservations, and she watched the ritualized corn dance. Then she came back to New York, and she said to the girls, I went to New Mexico and I got this idea, such and such and such, but this is not cultural appropriation. I'm just saying that
Didn't even exist.
Yeah, it didn't exist, but the point is that she was aware. She would always say throughout her life, this is driven by my influence of such and such, but it's not imitative of it. I took the influence and I took it within myself, and this is what I came out with. Okay, this is at Bennington School for the Dance. I thought it would be fun to see the girls on the lawn, watching her do one of her high kicks there, and that was one of her great moves. And that's okay. And we haven't mentioned him, but I thought this was a nice picture. This is at a summer arts camp in Colorado, where her accompanist and sometime lover, that's Louis Horst, who was her mentor before she met and became involved with Hawkins. And it's pretty clear that they did have an affair, but it was more of like a surrogate father kind of thing. He was an older gentleman, but he played the piano for her.
And married, wasn't he?
Oh,
Yes.
wait a minute, but Horst was like a god in that world.
Yes, Horst was like a god in that world.
He was a teacher, a critic, a composer. He wrote this book called Pre-Classic Dance Forms.
Right.
And people just sort of worshipped him. And
Yeah.
he was really, didn't he help to define modern dance choreography?
Yes, he did, and he wrote about. He's one of the first, or maybe the first, to write a series of textbooks that sort of documented his method and how he worked with Martha, and the amount of different composers that he was so well versed in that he brought into the modern dance studio, like Eric Satie, in the modern dance studio. This is a very sort of good example of the juxtaposition I was talking about. So they were having a nice little chat on a bench outside, and someone snapped this picture. And this is pictures. I won't go into too much of it, but the rights and permissions to get certain pictures and certain quotes really test your determination as a biographer, because this picture was the property of some woman who went to this camp, and her mother took this picture, and it was in her attic, and she heard I was writing a book about Martha Graham, and she sent me a picture of this picture, and then she made me I basically had to prostrate myself. But that's what you have to do.
That's what you have to do.
That's right.
But the thing is, Agnes DeMille said of Horst that he didn't practice and he would hit on a lot of wrong notes, she said, but he kept the beat and his beat was infallible.
Good.
And Horst was called the father confessor, as well as the banker, manager, accompanist, composer, teacher, publisher, and general factotum of contemporary dance and dancers.
And when they would go on their road trips with Dennis Shawn, and they would be sitting in these railroad cars, that were just for the people in the company, he would sit next to her, very close, and he would speak to her of Schopenhauer, not to be arcane, but that's the kind of things that they chatted about.
Okay, next picture.
I wanted to show the Noguchi, this sort of it's kind of like a prop, but kind of like an appendage. The whole collaboration with Noguchi it's been treated pretty well, and we don't have time this evening to dive into it wholeheartedly. But the interesting thing about that relationship was that he understood Martha's orientation toward the space around her, and they weren't really set designs. They were more like very abstract, like kind of like sketches, like through space, like a rope hanging down from the ceiling all the way to the stage, and this sort of net of wires that she appropriated to dance with.
Neil, weren't the set designs in her shows as modernist as the dancing?
Oh, yes.
And as sometimes as the music, too?
Yeah, very much so, very much so. And as a matter of fact, when during Hurricane Sandy, Martha Graham headquarters was in Westbeth. They're moving to Times Square, but at that time they were in Westbeth, and all of their costumes and sets were in the basement, and they all were flooded, and many of them were destroyed and had to be reconstructed.
Did Martha Graham's mother want to be an artist?
Did Martha Graham's mother want to be an
An
artist?
artist of some kind?
I'm not sure.
Because in thinking about this, she finally lets this man into her life, and then the dances that she creates are basically about these women who are making this choice between love and sex and independence and work. And which shows the wrangle that she was undergoing herself when she was involved with this man, when she was married to Eric Hawkins. Mm-hmm. Because the dances reflect that was her conflict between wanting to be with somebody and be independent and not curtailed by that.
I think that's quite accurate to the relationship. The conflict, the thing that I know, I said this earlier in the evening, but when you're choreographing, setting, as they say in the dance world, like you're setting a dance on a group of other people, or one other person, or even when let's just leaving solos aside. When you're setting a dance on someone, that's how the dancers describe the process. They use those words, okay? So her husband he had to be subject to her setting for his body on stage in front of an audience. And as Vicky said, and as I think I show in the book, or I do feel like I show it in the book, that this conflict could not be repressed. There's this kind of caution about, like William Yeats, the poet Yeats once wrote, who can say where the work begins and life ends? And often biographers, I've seen that they're criticized for too liberally appropriating, like he wrote this poem and that's because at that time he was doing this, or he painted this painting because at that time he was going through that, and that kind of thing. And so I really wanted to avoid that sort of simplistic unity. But in the choreography with Martha Graham and Eric Hawkins, I felt that it was warranted. This is the famous, this is from the...
This is the Barbara Morgan picture.
Yeah, the famous kick. Barbara Morgan was probably the most empathic photographer, and also one of the few people that Martha Graham allowed to photograph her in motion. And they had a very good collaboration because Martha felt that Barbara Morgan was a woman and understood her body and did things like got up on there's a picture in my book, I think it's in there, but Barbara Morgan's up on a ladder, and all the dancers are out on the stage, and she's put herself up on a ladder to get a different kind of angle, and she published a very, very important book called 12 Dances and Photographs, and she was a great admirer. Ah, yes. So Appalachian Spring, you are familiar.
Is that her most famous work?
I think it's her most accessible work. I really do feel that. I've seen it many, 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 many times. And every time, excuse me, every time I see it, I realize that this is one dance where she really does let you in as an audience. It's a story. It's about a relationship. It's with a couple. This is Eric Hawkins and Martha Graham, as he's the husbandman man, and she's the wife. Pardon?
Is this Appalachian?
Yeah, Appalachian Spring. So
And the great score, of
yes,
course.
but the Copeland
great
score. But again, and I urge you, if you if you ever have an interest in this. So after a while, I realized that Appalachian Spring has just as much conflict in it as any other duet, even though it's very lyrical and kind of flowy and kind of rustic and so forth. But there are two intervals in Appalachian Spring where Martha Graham basically goes berserk while her husband, while her character husband is there. There's kind of like this very harsh ambivalent, two sections that she dropped in there just in case you thought that this was going to be a good relationship.
No.
Next. Okay. So Mills College, which I think I read, it's in California, and Martha Graham had a residency out there in the 30s. And Thomas Bouchard was one of the only other photographers that she admitted into her world. And the reason I wanted to show this was because this is an outside photograph. And this was like a kind of like a Greek theater, like a Greek amphitheater where Jose Limon and other dancers also performed. And I like this picture because I think it exemplifies this torqued body that I've been trying to explain to you for the past hour, where, all the parts of the body have their own movement that she says comes from here, but it means that it comes from here, but they all have their directions that they need to go in different ways at the same time. The best way would be just to go see Martha Graham Company.
No, I have to. That's a good segue. The best way is to read the book.
Oh.
Because what Neil does, and it's really hard to do, is he puts you in a good orchestra seat, watching the dances, and he describes each movement of the dance, and even tells you about the curtain calls. You feel like you're there opening night, and that's hard to do, because I write about films. I can see the film and describe it to you, but Neil is recreating.
Yeah.
He's recreating from a series of different formats,
Right.
and you make the dance come alive. So there were times when I thought you were too kind to her, personally or psychologically, but your demonstration of her genius on the stage, her theatricality, her brilliance as an actress, that comes through so clearly in the book. And that's why you should read it, because you will be in the best seat in the house for watching these dances. And that, as a writer, is so hard to do. And this gentleman did it. Really hard to
Neil
recreate.
tells the story of this large, fiercely lived life, a life beset by conflict, competition, and loneliness.
And she was a
Filled
good writer, too.
She was, but she
Martha.
was a good storyteller in dance, filled with fire and inspiration, drive, passion, dedication, and sacrifice in work and in dance creation.
And a great teacher. All her life, she was a teacher.
True.
And this is the first book to bring to life a full portrait of the artist and the woman. So let's thank Neil for a fascinating evening.
Well, I would like to thank my interlocutors for their patience and their very humbling praise. And I would like to say that looking back, now as I said, it's been 3 years, I feel that what Vicky did was she made sure that it was our book, but it was my book, if you know what I mean. It was our book because we went on this very long journey. But when I look back on it, I read it and I feel like I did manage to put my best self in there.
And your dance knowledge. You're a dance teacher, right? Or
And so the book
history
is
of dance.
available over yonder. Oh, hi, Daisy. The book is available over yonder, and I hope everybody goes and takes a look at it and buys it, because it really is an extraordinary book. She was an extraordinary woman. We didn't even get to 3/4 of what I wanted to ask. So, to be continued. I don't even know if we have times for questions. One question.
One question. This is during the 20s, right? When did she start?
Yes.
Wasn't Isadora Duncan still alive and kicking in?
Yes, but this is, I'm so glad you brought up Isadora Duncan. I mean, I'm so glad. I'm not really so glad, I'm just glad.
You can be glad.
I'm glad. This is another example of, shall we say, the obsession school of biographers that I'm a member of. I'm actually the president of the obsession school of biographers. But I thought to myself, Isadora, she's really the matriarch, and she was sort of, her gossamer spirit was like encompassing everybody. But they never, I went back to her itinerary in America. She wasn't here full time. She was in Europe much of the time. So I went back to her entire itinerary in this country during the period that Martha Graham was traveling and performing with her company, and not once did they ever see or have any interaction of any kind. I'm just saying. And she even says at one point, well, I never saw Isadora, but she, this or that or the other.
But Isadora
She
looked
wouldn't
toward
have-
Europe.
She wouldn't have
and-
existed without Isadora Duncan.
Yeah, but the thing is that, I agree with that, but that is really,
But actually, it's an important point.
Yes.
Isadora looked toward Europe,
Right.
as did Denishon.
Right.
But Martha looked toward America
absolutely.
Isadora Duncan also didn't have a school.
and didn't have a school, but she was
She had
infatuated.
her girls. She also had her followers.
Yes, she did.
She had her troupe.
Yeah. I think it's not, I don't want to leave with a kind of like offhanded comment about Isadora Duncan. That wouldn't be appropriate. I think that it's one of those, another example of a kind of iconic, trailblazing, feminine figure that Martha Graham by nature did not like to acknowledge as an actual influence on her personally, which is not to say that there isn't influence there, but it again goes to the case of Martha not wanting to acknowledge. Have you ever heard of this book called The Anxiety of Influence by Harold Bloom? I feel like the anxiety of influence. I feel like she would be a good case study for that.
Okay, well, thank you, everybody, for coming. And thank you, Neil.